Hi, good day, everyone. This is Sir Tristan here. If you're coming back from my previous tier list, you're gonna have to subscribe right now. And after that, we can get on with the video. We have another tier list related to spells specifically this time, and it's kind of a follow-up from our previous video, right? We're on the wizards. Each wizard has a signature spell, and each spell does its own things. So I figure, hey, let's rank the spells as well. And I think I'll do a tier list on many different choices you can make in the game, and we'll go from there. But first, here we have our Aether Beam. This is Aldrich's signature spell. Aether Beam does make sure the right one. Base spell damage of 45, so kind of low. But the base cooldown is 0.367 seconds, so very low base cooldown. Um, if we're looking here, we have a few different things. We have converting to healing when hitting ourselves or teammates. I have no idea how you ever hit yourself with this spell, as it targets the nearest enemy or the highest health enemy. If you have the third augment, which targets the enemy with the most health, and also you can have up to 7 projectiles through augments. So I'm gonna put this in A tier, and the reason why I'm gonna put this in A tier is it does a lot of things you want. It does very consistent damage. If you get a few range upgrades, it shoots pretty far, right? And the healing's pretty good, especially if you have this on Mr. Aldrich. If you have it on someone else, it's not as good. And that's true for all of the signature spells. But even still, I think it has its place as a support spell. And if you want to upgrade this to its maximum potential, I'm going to be saying, hey, pick up Lightning Augment along with either Frost, Fire, or Venom. And that will be giving you a good little way to support your team. Either you're going to be doing a bit extra damage with the Plasma Augment, you're going to be shredding resistances, or you're going to be slowing them down. I think this is a good example of an A tier, and it's A tier because it has multiple projectiles and it has something else. It has an X factor, and that X factor is that it heals, right? In solo play, though, this probably goes down to a B, maybe even C, just because healing yourself does nothing. Um, as far as I can tell. So that's the Aether Beam here. Let's move on to the Hidden Spell Arcane Broadsword. Let me pull this up. Yeah, so Arcane Broadsword, base spell damage of 128, so nearly triple the damage of Aether Beam. Which makes it seem like, oh, hey, that's S tier. But the cooldown's 5.1 seconds. Ooh. But its duration is 3 seconds. And if you've played the game, you know it can hit any number of enemies. So then it starts to even out. But the range base is short. I'm going to tell you right now, this is a B tier spell. And I'm going to tell you why it's a B tier spell. It's B tier because it does something really well, but it has significant drawbacks that make it not as good. And those big drawbacks are specifically the augments. Your spell rotates more slowly. So if you've played the game, the spell rotates around you in a clockwise direction, right? Moving more slowly isn't a bad thing because it means that you can have multiple swords out at once, right? Um, but it increases in size up to 3 times. The second augment, your spell does more damage when you are standing still, up to 4. That is the main reason why it's not A tier. Um, Ludwig has this very strange affinity for not moving, and if you've played the game at all and you've played against harder enemies, you realize they start to move faster as you play through more and higher rounds. Well, what does that mean? Standing still gets you killed. Stay with me now. Standing still gets you killed. So do not take this if you intend on going on multiple ascensions. That being said, if this is one of your first times playing the game and you really want to secure a win, S tier, on the easier difficulties for one round, just to beat the boss one time, but not to kill the boss to get to the boss. You need something else there, or a lot of skill, I'll be honest. And I'd say the skill that you need to play it this well is not worth it. You play this really well, it becomes A tier. So for people who aren't, it's probably closer to C. I'm going to average it at B. Maybe you have an argument otherwise, but I don't think it's any better than that. I think it's a cool spell, but being cool doesn't make you powerful, unfortunately. And next is Astro Orb. This is from the first mage most people will ever play, which is Reginald. Reggie. It has a very low base cooldown, and you'll be imparted on that every time you play it. Um, let's see here. I think I'm gonna put it top of B. And the reason being is it has good base damage, 96. You can kind of think of it as like the basic spell. About 100 damage, 96. 0.736 second base cooldown, so less than a second. Average range, and has some good augments. You can cast it in bursts of 3. Keep in mind the 3-round burst isn't casting 3 times as fast, it's more like 1.5 to 2 for any burst. But still, 50% to about 2 times as many is still very good. Also, projectiles split in 2 on hit or at the end of their lifetime. So this gives you a bit of extra range, but it's important to note these go off at an angle, right? And they don't seek enemies. And this is a change I wish that they would make to the game, is that these projectiles that split off are fired at the near enemy, even if they would have missed. Because it's very uncontrollable. And if you get a lot of upgrades on this, because you can get up to 6 of these splitting upgrades, right? You get a lot of projectiles on screen, which looks really cool, but none of them are hitting anything, which is why you see them. Um, in addition, you see the one that says the final augment, your spell aims at the enemy with the most health, and the base damage is increased by 15%. I've talked about this before, I'll talk about it again, but since it's the first time that I'm bringing it up in this video, your spell's base damage increasing by 15%, right? Let's compare that to a global upgrade that you can get from level up. 15% is not even legendary, right? So it's the second highest tier to affect all of your spells by 15% damage. And it's only the rare or the second tier in terms of spell damage. So getting this just means that it targets the enemy with the highest health. Okay, unfortunately, it doesn't make the ones that split off target that enemy, you know. So the biggest thing I'd say about this is that it's good for wave clear, but if you want DPS on the boss or you want to take down higher health targets, this is actually kind of weak. But I think it's good. I think you'll see a lot of success. I don't think it's as good as Aether Beam, mostly because Aether Beam can constantly apply elements when it hits, right? And it doesn't miss. Astral Orbs can miss. Um, these are kind of out of order. I'm sorry for that. I had an issue trying to upload these. They weren't working for me, but I got them working. Aurora Wings. So this is the new spell for Maggie, the new wizard. Sorry about that. We have base damage 134. Pretty good. Base spell cooldown of 3 and base spell distance of long. So this goes far. It casts relatively slow and has decent damage. It kind of makes it seem like it's C tier when you think about it, but let's read the augments. Your spell converts to healing when hitting yourselves or teammates. As we said before, having that on a damaging spell is pretty good. Your spell hits an additional target up to 6 targets with 3 upgrades. So that means the base it hits 3 enemies, right? And it explodes at the end of its lifetime. An important thing to note about this in playing, these things stick around. They stick around and then they target the nearest enemy. I didn't realize that before. I might have to put this in A tier. Because it's kind of like Astral Orbs, except it explodes and it seeks. And yeah, it fires a bit slower. But I think you're willing to take that because exploding means it guaranteed damages enemies around the one that you hit, right? And it happens to heal. And it can kind of like store a bunch of these birds around like landmines. And who doesn't want birds that explode? I certainly do. Um, I may have to be wrong, but if you go back to my March update video, I beat the hardest difficulty first time solo with this spell. Um, I think for that reason I'm gonna put it there. Maybe more playing will tell me that it's better or worse, but we'll go from there. Let me just get up onto our next one. So next is Chthonic Charge. So this is the first one that does not have a starting spell for any of our mages. This is just stock spell. Nobody starts with it, so that means it has no special benefits, and it has you can't be guaranteed to get this in a run. Let's talk about this spell. Chthonic Charge kind of like lays landmines, and then they explode when enemies walk into them, or when you place two of these Chthonic Charges over each other. Right? So your spell converts to healing when hitting your teammates or yourself. It's really hard to hit yourself with this spell because you're running away from enemies, and this is kind of in that runaway category, which is its own playstyle really. But it's good on any sort of caster. So if you were to play like Reginald with Astro Orbs, it's good on that. I think this is a good overall, all around secondary, tertiary, etc. spell. Let's talk about the augments. So it converts into healing when hitting teammates or yourself. It casts in bursts, which just really means that it lays 3 down in a row. Again, casting in burst is kind of 2 times as much. You can think of it that way. But you cast 3 at a time. Spell moves towards enemies is actually kind of mediocre. Doesn't really do anything. Where would I place this? I think this spell is deceptively, when you're playing not on solitary focus, when you're playing with multiple spells, it's not your main spell, right? You want to focus on something else. But as a, like, you start off, and particularly, we're going to get to this in a moment, when you're playing something that needs to get to a mid game to be able to get out of that portion of the game where you're kind of slowly drowning all the time because you can't quite kill the enemies, Chthonic Charge gets you through that, right? It gets you through that in a way that some of these other spells that are really focused on you need to put points into me for me to be good. You just put a few damage into this, right? It's good. It's good. Just a few damage. Even base, it's pretty good. And because of that, I'm putting it into high B tier. Um, that being said, it doesn't get any higher than B tier. This spell is never going to feel crazy. At its best, it's going to be good. Maybe you could say base of A tier, but I'm not going past that. Oh, and I didn't mention the base damage on Chthonic Charge here, 134 and 1.67 second cooldown. And it says range is short, but it just places it on the ground. So next is Falling Stars. Base spell damage of 134, which is pretty high. Base cooldown is only 1.1 second. Base range long. But if you guys have watched the previous video, you know where this is going. It's going in S tier. S is for star, baby. The reason why Falling Stars is S tier, and why it's, in my opinion, the best or tied for the best spell in the game, is because of its augments. Number one, it explodes at the end of its lifetime, right? So the star just falls down and hits a random enemy. Think of it that way, right? It falls down and explodes at the end of its lifetime. So it's just doing random little explosions. You don't need to be close to your enemies. It also applies elements in the explosion radius. So if you infuse it with lightning, it does massive AoE and you only need 1 augment. Additionally, you can get your spell cast an additional projectile, and this is the second one, which makes this really strong, because every single projectile explodes every single time it's cast, and you can get up to 7 of them, which basically means you do 7 times the damage of any other spell at base. And the guaranteed hit because they are auto target. You don't have to aim this. it just targets an enemy. The last augment I would consider sometimes not getting, but that's up to you. Your spell aims at the enemy with the most health. Your base damage is increased by 15%. Only take that augment, by the way, if you have nothing better. Falling Stars is weaker in the game. Don't get me wrong about that. But in my opinion, has the strongest, absolute strongest late game, and that is why it is S tier, because you can easily do 4 times the damage of any of your allies. The reason why is because once you get this upgraded, you kill off the enemies before your allies can even hit them. They're just dead. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. If you haven't had a good run on Star Mage, really consider playing it again. The power is crazy. Let's talk about Hex Bomb. Hex Bomb's another neutral spell. It's kind of like Chthonic Charge's baby brother in a way, but it's kind of the same thing. I'm gonna put it bottom of base tier, B tier. You can think of it as base tier, I guess. Based, whatever. Um, they're kind of the same spell. It's weird, but they're not the same spell at all. And I find these hard to place. I like Chthonic Charge better, and maybe this is why this is C tier. I like Chthonic Charge better because it places, you see where it is, and the enemies are aggroed to you, you can walk them into the Chthonic Charge. Hexbomb, you can do the same thing. Hexbomb shoots it in a lob behind you, right? And then you can get some augments. You can get the augment that heals, so they both heal. It splits in 2 at the end of its lifetime, up to 6 times, and gets an additional bounce up to 6. That being said, maybe this has a better late game, but I usually am never maxing out this spell, so maybe that's part of the problem. I'm going to put it in C tier, and I'm going to be happily surprised when I see somebody fully upgrade this spell and it's really good. I'm only putting it this low because it just doesn't seem like as strong as an option, particularly because you need to be running away to use it, and you can't really aim it. You can, but it's so much harder to aim. As I said, it can convert to healing when hitting yourself or teammates. It never really hits yourself because it's firing away from you. It splits in 2 at the end of its lifetime, and it does an additional bounce. Um, Again, this is also kind of slow damage, so that's why I'm putting it here. And the base damage isn't crazy, 149, 3.64-second cooldown. I think it's a good example of C tier, but I would gladly be proven wrong. Next here's Magic Missile. Magic Missile. This is the Wizard King spell, and it feels really slow when you start. Good base damage 140, 2.2-second cooldown, average range. Average range. I put it here. So let's see what it can do. It explodes at the end of its lifetime. As we've said with Star Mage, that's really good. It splits in 2 at the end of its lifetime, up to 6 times. Now this is important when we're differentiating these two spells. They both split in 2, but this one explodes. So if it misses, the explosion can hit. If this misses, it does nothing. And also the final upgrade, it aims at the enemy with the most health. Base range is increased by 22%. Probably one of the worst augments. I think this is better than Chthonic Charge. It's pretty strong. I don't think it's better than this. It might be. It very well might be, but I think you put it here. It's mostly just, I think that the ability for this to do AoE damage over something like Astral Orbs is just better. It fires out. You don't have to be like standing near them, especially if you get the final rage upgrade. I just said it was bad, but I guess if you get that, you can fire some stuff off. You can run away. You'll be doing damage in an area. It'll be exploding. It'll be nice, but I don't think it's A tier. Come at me in the comments if I'm wrong. Um, B tier. Moonerang. Moonerang. Hard to say. And hard to really say if this is good at all. I'm going to put it in D tier. I'm going to put it in D tier with the wizard itself. Let's talk about why. Space spell damage is only 57. We're going over here. We're looking at Reggie. Moon Mage has half the damage. Mind you, it can hit more enemies. It can hit more enemies, but it can only hit half the damage. And the cooldown is 1.89 seconds, so 2-second cooldown. The range says average, but it feels low, I'll be honest. And there's kind of a problem that I have with this spell. And it's a problem that I have with a few spells. So it can linger at the furthest point. So that sounds like, okay, what does that do? Increasing size and duration by 10%. So it spends longer in the air. Alright. Your spell deals critical damage at its furthest point, so it lingers, and that sounds like a combo. It does critical damage, guaranteed critical damage, and the crit damage is increased by 15% with this augment. Okay, your spell aims at the enemy with the most health, increasing the base damage again by 15%. So the problem with this, and the problem with Moon Mage, is that these Moonarangs do pretty good AoE damage. They actually, when you have them upgraded, they do pretty good, especially if you get some crit damage upgrades. The problem is that you have very little control of where they linger. If you don't have the range, they don't fire out. They don't automatically shoot, right? So if you don't have the range, they don't shoot out. You can't put them close to you unless you can't put them on the ground unless you have range. So you get range, but the more range you have, the further out they shoot. So what'll happen is you'll be fighting the boss, they'll shoot right through, and then they'll enlarge behind the boss, even when the boss is standing still and doing his attack, right? And they'll be doing crit damage away from the boss. I had an absolutely insane build on Moon Mage, and it was still the most painful thing in the world to get through the boss, because even though I could absolutely shred all of the normal enemies, they just went through the boss. And all that crit damage I built did nothing. And it wasn't even that good for shredding enemies, really. I'd rather have any of these other spells that deal with waves of enemies, I'll be honest. I'm putting this in D tier. Come at me in the comment section if you don't think that it is, but yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. If the only saving grace for this would be if maybe it shot out and landed a bit closer, right? So it's in the way of enemies, then it goes up a lot actually, because then the crit is constantly applied. If this like shot out and then homed in slowly on the closest enemy with the most health as one of its augments, I would probably put it up in the B tier, because then it's constantly dealing crit damage and moving towards enemies. But what happens is it shoots back and then it sits in a place where there's no enemies and all the enemies walk towards you. So you're only doing base damage. That's why it's D tier. It's because it has a really cool concept, but it never works out because they're always walking past the big moons. Um, yeah, I'm gonna stop ranting about that. Next is Necro World, the other one that was giving me trouble, but we have it here. Necro World is another neutral spell. And it has a spell base damage of 40, but a duration of 1.4 seconds on a 1.5 seconds on a 4-second cooldown. So this is an AoE spell, and it kind of targets random areas. I'm gonna put this in C tier along with this. They're kind of the same spell in ways. Let me talk about the augments. Your spell's damage converts to healing when hitting your teammates or yourself. You can cast an additional projectile up to 7, and it moves towards enemies as the last one. So you can have 7 of these bad boys. Um, I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's excellent. I think it's good. It does what it wants as advertised. I usually pick this up over this one, but I think this one has higher potential. I'm just putting this in C tier because I think that it's not as good. I'd rather have the Chthonic Charge after having played more. I used to pick this up a lot more though. I don't think there's too much more to say. These 3 spells are kind of just extras. I don't think they do a ton, but they're definitely good as a little bridging spell. Uh, this is Phantom Blaze. So this is the signature spell for Gabanelli, the Jester. And the base damage is 300. times 3. And the base spell cooldown is 2 seconds. I played a bit more with this. I thought this was better. And I thought Campanelli was better. But there's going to be a shakeup in the tier list next time I do the wizard tier list, which will probably be in a few months, I'll be honest. But um, I'm putting an A tier, so he's getting demoted. I still think it's really good. So what it does is it casts 3 shards in front of you, 3 blades, every 2 seconds. Each one deals 300 damage. So great base damage, but you need to play around a lot to do that damage. Um, and we have 4 augments for this. It's the first one to have, to have 4 augments. Spell damage converts to healing when hitting yourself or teammates. Again, this hitting yourself, I don't know how you hit yourself with this spell, but congratulations if you've done that. Spell cast behind you. This makes it way easier to play with, as opposed to just choosing three in front, shoots 3 behind as well. It also applies to all of the upgrades. Your spell casts an additional projectile up to 6 for total projectiles of 9 or 18 with both sides. So you can get bursts of 9, basically. Really good. Shoot out a bunch of blades, they do a bunch of damage. You can heal your allies. I think it's great for support, and I think it's better than Aldrich Speed, 100%. The only reason why I moved it down to A tier is because I got a little bit of gameplay with something else that's going to come up. And I think it's number 2. I think it's better than this is. Gonna shake up the list a little bit. But that's Phantom Blades. Next is Rocky Road. Now this is a personal favorite of mine, but I think it's worse than I think it is. This is kind of where we have a divergence between when the character is good and when the spell is good. Cavan is good because he has bonus XP, which is way stronger than Moon Mages, right? Rocky Road is a really solid spell, but I don't think it's as good as these other ones. It's great for early game though. Base spell damage of 30, base spell cooldown of 0.43 seconds, and duration of 2.2. What does that mean? It lays down these rocks, as you can see in the picture, in a road, and the enemies walk into it. What makes it better than these ones, I guess that's not the same. What makes it better than these two, in terms of laying things out, is that you can really control the shape, right? You can really control where it goes. And it really allows for just some really strong application of the spell. You can just constantly keep them hit by it. The base damage is low though, then that's the main thing that keeps it from being A tier. Augment number 1, it occasionally creates an explosion. So it's already doing a bunch of AoE damage and explodes for extra damage. Nice. It does extra damage towards the end of its trail. I don't have the number on that. I wish I did. Hopefully it's not 1%. If it is, then maybe I need to put them down to C tier, but I think it's like some decent number. Your spell occasionally creates spikes that deal critical damage. I'm pretty sure it just means that they automatically crit, which is great. You can kind of just pick up crit damage and not crit chance with this, and you just gotta be chilling. Good application of all of your elements, does a lot of good, but it just doesn't have that X factor that really makes it easy to kill a bunch of enemies. You have to run ahead of them, and it's just easier to apply other ones. Let's go on to Room Bursts. So this is Hattie's starting spell. Base damage is 118. Not that high, but it sounds familiar. 118. Let's think about this. It shoots out in groups of 4, right? Shoots out in groups of 4. And, shoots out in groups of 4. So it seems kind of weak when we think about it. Like, okay, well, what is the point of this spell? It shoots out in 4 different cardinal directions. Pretty low cooldown, 0.67. So it sounds pretty good. But this is where this spell takes off. And this is why this is second in S tier. It's because of 2 upgrades and augments this. So shootout and patterns of 4, right? We can increase the number of projectiles. Hey, that sounds like a common theme. Increasing projectiles. Increasing projectiles. So something that the top 5 all have in common, and it's that they all have more than the original number of projectiles. That's very important. To increase the number of projectiles. Start with 4. You can upgrade it 6 times to 10. You can also cast it at bursts. Hello? So you can basically get 20. Okay. And it casts in a rotating pattern. That just basically makes it easier to cast. This spell is very, 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 very good. It's not Falling Stars good, but it has a better early game. So how you can see is like this is more reliably getting to an insane spot. This gets to a more insane spot, right? I'm ranking these off of absolute power and usefulness. So this is more powerful. Second most powerful. I'll leave it at that. Play with Hattie. Play with it. Even though Hattie has a few downgrades, I think that Hattie's better than I gave credit for. I'll be honest. This is very good. You fire a lot of shots with this. Next is Scepter Mesh. Scepter Mesh is kind of like Scepter Mesh is kind of like Rocky Road. And it's kind of like a bad Rocky Road. So I'm going to put it here in C tier. I think I'd rather have anything else here. Just not Moon Mage's ability. So let's talk about why. So Chuteo, I think it's three scepters at the start, and then it creates a line between each one. Base damage of 47. It lasts for 10 seconds, right? And no matter how far apart these meshes are, they do damage between each other, which sounds pretty good, but the damage just isn't there. And we'll notice that the augments do not help you with doing more damage, they just help you with applying it to more enemies. So, first augment is that they all connect to each other, which, if you make a triangle, or as we see later, we can cast additional projectiles. But again, it isn't an instance where additional projectiles do more damage. It just creates a bigger space. It creates more scepters. And they don't all fire off at once. So you still have to wait for them all to fire off before they connect. Basically just meaning you just make a zone that does damage, which isn't bad, but I would rather have something else, I'll be honest. Also, it explodes at the end of its lifetime, but it has such a long lifetime that exploding does not do anything. It does not. I mean, it does something, but if they're getting killed by the scepter mesh, they're not getting killed by the explosion. So I'm putting it in C tier. I think it's better than uh, the Moonerang. If you see like this, and this in the same selection screen, pick one of these two. Don't pick this. But if you see like this, Chthonic Charge, and Campanelli, I mean, you're probably going to want to focus on whatever your wizards are already doing, right? Even though this is A tier. So I would recommend picking up Chthonic Charge, even though it's technically worse. It's just B tier for a different reason. This is A tier for investing your levels into it. This is B tier just as base, and this is C tier as base, right? This is D tier in general. If you don't upgrade this, this is terrible. Uh, okay, lastly we have Solar Pulse. Solar Pulse is the signature spell of Sun Mage, of course. Yeah. Is it B tier? I really like this spell. It reminds me a lot of Sunfire Cape from League of Legends. But I think it goes here. I really like the idea of this spell. 32 base damage. So it's kind of in line with Rocky Road. Base cooldown of 0.33. So constantly activating, constantly going. Starting spell for Sunlight. But what kills this is the augments. Not the first one. It converts to healing when hitting yourselves or teammates. That's good. That's great. I like that. Your spell's area increases in size the lower you are in health. That sounds good. But I don't know what the end number is, and I'll tell you, it's never good enough. This never increases to the size where you think that it would be fun to use. Um, Never. I mean, maybe I'll do some gameplay and I'll prove myself wrong, but eh, it's so short range. That's the biggest problem with the spell. If it was a 50% larger base, maybe we could start talking. Um, but as it stands, it's way too small. Also, I don't know if this is new, but you take less damage from enemies inside the area, equaling plus 20 armor. So because of how this works, that's usually where you're taking your damage from is enemies close by. It's nice, but what I would like to see to make this spell a lot better is maybe instead of increasing in size the lower we are in health, we could have something like damage is considerably faster, like damage rate is increased by 50% or something crazy like that. And even then, I don't think it would go up a ton, but maybe I'm wrong. That's the list. That's the list, guys. Thanks for sticking it through. Tell me what you think. If you played this game, if you're not, if you haven't played this game, what do you think about my ranking? I think it's pretty solid. I think that's where we want to be with these spells. And I think if you want to win, look at picking the spells at the top of this list. Um, yeah, if you made it this far, you liked the video, you subscribed to my channel, and you watch my next video. You watch every video on my channel, and I'll be seeing you.